Hi, guys. So sorry that I am not here. Obviously, I would much rather be there with you, but this is going to have to suffice. So let's take some notes on the Articles of Confederation and the Constitution. Okie dokie. So just a little bit of a review. Remember, we have just finished fighting. Oh, goodness. Just finished fighting the American Revolution, right? So because of the French and Indian War, the British felt the need to tax us tremendously because in their minds, they fought the war to protect the colonists' land. And so because of that, the colonists should help pay for that expense. And so that's where all the crazy amount of taxation came from. And of course, our bitter feelings, no taxation without representation. So, after you get past all those taxes and tension, then we get to fighting. The other day when you were doing your gallery walk, you learned about Lexington and Concord, where the shot was heard around the world. And of course, we watched that Schoolhouse Rock. I know how much you all enjoyed that, especially you, Layla. And following Lexington and Concord, where there was, a little bit of disagreement about who fired first, we led to Bunker Hill, where even though it was a British victory, it was still a moral victory for the US, or a morale boost, because we felt as though we held our own ground, made the British, storm 3 times before they actually finally took them down. So that was a big deal. And then you read about the Battle of Trenton. And as long as you remember that that's where Washington crossed the Delaware, you should be good to go. And surprise the Hessians in their lair in Trenton, New Jersey, a good solid victory for Washington. And then Saratoga is what finally convinced the French that, yes, they should provide help to us. And the role that geography played in Saratoga, hopefully that high ground, you remember that station at the gallery walk. And then finally, it's ended with Yorktown because of the French assistance. Lord Cornwallis, the British leader, and his men are trapped both by land by Washington, Rochambeau, Lafayette, etc., and then by the French Navy by sea. And so they make this Cornwallis sandwich and take a bite, and then that's it. That's done. The British surrender. And even though that's in 1781 and the treaty isn't signed until 1783, we've made a new government a while ago, ever since the Declaration of Independence was signed. So listen, know this, the Declaration of Independence, not a governing document. Just like Valley Forge is not a battle. It just takes place around the same time, and the Declaration provides some influence and some purpose as to what we're doing and how our new government will be set up. Okay, so right there it says, where do we want the government's power to come from? I hope you guys remember this from when we did the activity looking at the Declaration of Independence. Remember, the government's main job is to what? Provide protection. And the government gets its authority, its legitimacy from people. And we give the government our consent to govern, excuse me. And so that's where their legitimacy comes from. This whole enlightened idea of the social contract. Free people come together to create a government to provide them with protection. And then remember what Paine and Jefferson said. If the government doesn't provide that protection, then it's time to say bye-bye to said government. Okie dokie. And this is just kind of comparing some early state governments with the early national government that we're going to create, which is the Articles of Confederation. So there it is. So on your note-taking guide, and listen, this video is going to be on YouTube, so you can speed me up, you can slow me down, you can press pause. I'm going to move pretty quick. The Articles of Confederation really goes into effect in 1781, the same year we defeat the British at Yorktown. All right. And it is written in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, just like where the Declaration of Independence was written, just like where the Constitutional Convention will take place in a little bit, 6 years from now, and also where the Continental Congress met. So, I mean, this is like the place to go. This is the happening place. And it creates a limited national government. That's that next blank for you. And it's limited, meaning that the states had more power, which means that a Confederate government is created. And perhaps you've heard that term before, Confederate. Think of the Confederacy, think of the South during the Civil War. Remember, the South split from the Union because they wanted to have states' rights. Of course, we know that it's states' rights to own people as property, but the government they created was one where the states had a lot more power than the flimsy central government. Okay, so that's just a few other things up there for you that you might want to write down. We create this kind of government because we don't want an all-powerful government like the one we just left. We don't want to make anything resembling the British government, right? So this new government only has one branch of power. There's no executive branch, there's no judicial branch, there's just a legislative body. Okay, so just a legislative branch. And it was unicameral, which means that every state only had one vote. Okay, that's not what unicameral means. I'm sorry. Unicameral means one body. There wasn't a House and the Senate. It was just like one Congress. And yes, each state did have one vote, so everybody is represented equally. Okay. Also, there was the agreement that if they needed to amend the Articles of Confederation in any way, like make a permanent change to it, everyone had to agree. It had to be unanimous. And hopefully you're understanding that's going to be hard to do. It's going to be real hard to do, which is why there's no amendments in the Articles of Confederation at all. They tried 8 times. Nothing succeeded. So the question that they've got to consider is just how much power should all these ordinary citizens have, because if you look at the list of grievances in the Declaration, the king did this, the king did this, the king did this, and of course the big one, no taxation without representation. You want to give people as much power as you possibly can, or at least they're going to want to do that. So the government they created was so limited to the point where it just didn't work. And this is a great political cartoon. Why don't you press pause, look at this for a minute here, read it, and really see how it's going to be rough sailing ahead for the Articles of Confederation. All right, so a couple problems with the Articles. Number one, they could not tax. They could ask for money. I think that's going to go over real well, right? If you didn't have to pay taxes in your paycheck and your boss just said, would you pay taxes? I'm guessing you guys wouldn't, just like I wouldn't. You want to keep that money, right? So borrowing money and not being able to tax, that's going to be a pretty significant weakness. And they also could not create a uniform currency, which meant you had 13 different monies out there, which meant every state probably thought their money was worth more than the other person's money. It caused issues and trade and all sorts of things. Also, they couldn't form an army. They could request soldiers, but not demand soldiers. So that goes back to the thing again, can only ask for things politely, but not demand. It's not going to go over well. And since there was no army, no military, no protection, essentially, that meant that they were unable to enforce treaties or to regulate interstate commerce. And they don't have that power to regulate interstate trade. The states are supposed to be doing that themselves. But if, Georgia got into an argument with, say, South Carolina, the Articles could do nothing about it. And so Georgia and South Carolina could just like bicker back and forth nonstop, and it would just go on for a really long time. There was no executive or central judicial system. Like I told you earlier, the only branch that existed was the legislative branch. So there's no president under the Articles because that person would be too much like a what, do you think? If you said king out there, you're right. And there was no central judicial system, so that kind of stunk too. Every state could interpret laws their own way, which could present some problems. And, that's a funny concept, federalism. We'll talk about that a lot more next year. And like I mentioned earlier, each state had one vote regardless of size. So if you're a big state like California today, imagine California having the same representation in the government as, say, Wyoming. Wyoming has less than the amount of people in East Cobb in the entire state. East Cobb has more people living there than Wyoming does. So that's, kind of a big deal. And California has, tons of people. So you want to make sure that there's kind of fair representation, and that didn't really exist here. Also, like I mentioned, all 13 states had to agree to approve an amendment, but in order to pass a bill into a law, you needed 9 out of 13. It's different today. Today, it's only 26 out of 50 states. So a simple majority, that's much more challenging to achieve. They did have a few things that they did well. I got to throw them props for this, this thing. Number one, they did sign the Treaty of Paris, 1783, yay. That was where America officially became recognized as independent. Our borders extended all the way to the Mississippi River, actually allowed us to move to that area that, you know, before that we were told we couldn't go there because of the British signing the proclamation of 1763 with the natives. Also in the Treaty of Paris, it transferred control of Florida back to Spain. Great Britain did it in their own territory, by the way. And there was this actual clause which said that the loyalists were supposed to be treated in a nice manner. Isn't that interesting? Like, how on earth does that get enforced? Anyway. Some other victories. The second one on your note-taking guide, number 2, is the Land Ordinance of 1785. And remember, if I'm talking fast, just press pause, guys. So the Land Ordinance of 1785 involved that Northwest Territory that was north of the Ohio River Valley and west of Pennsylvania. So I've got a map of it right there in purple, as you can see. So the Articles of Confederation sold this land, this you know, government-owned land, if you will, for revenue, since they couldn't tax, but they still wanted to do things. And so they get really detailed with it. Basically, they divided the land into something called townships of 6.6 square miles. And then each township was divided into 36 sections. I mean, look at this up here on this map. It's nuts. And 36 sections of 640 acres, which sold for $1 an acre. But, excuse me, sorry, it was a long day today. But most people can't afford $640 for a section of land. So then you take those itty bitty little sections and you divide those up into plots, and more people move. So hopefully you're understanding that as they're developing this area for people to move, people are going to move, and then you're going to have to start allowing for people to be represented in the government. And I just put an example of Pete's up there. So, you know, you take your township and then you split it in half, split in quarters, 8ths, 16ths, and it shows you just how much a little piece of that pie is. But that itty bitty piece of pie was plenty of land to farm on, at least for subsistence purposes. And since so many people are moving to this area, it's now time for them to become states, right? So the Northwest Ordinance of 1787, the goal of this, which was 2 years after the Land Ordinance, was to turn the settled land into states, right? So don't just have people living there that are not organized politically, allow them to become states. And so they did set some rules or parameters. Once you had 5,000 people living there, then you could elect an assembly, which is great. So, you know, you don't have the no taxation without representation issue, right? Because you are electing people to an assembly to represent your interests. Once there's 60,000 people, then you could apply to be a state, as long as 3 conditions are met. 1, you've got to have a Republican constitution. And that doesn't mean Republican like today. That means Republican, meaning the people elect folks to speak on their behalf in the government. And the people are the ultimate source of the power. Number 2, you have to ban slavery. So hopefully you guys are seeing already, we're going to have an issue with slavery, and these northern states are not going to be allowing it. I mean, just like during the Civil War, guys, the North was fighting against slavery, right? And the third thing is you have to establish schools. And this goes along with the rest of New England that really, you know, put a lot of emphasis on education so people could read the Bible for religious purposes. But this is how 6 new states came to join the Union, which is pretty exciting. You know, if you're a Buckeyes fan, this is how we got Ohio. If you're Minnesota fan, this is how we got Minnesota and Michigan, a little mitten right there. Also Indiana, Illinois, and my personal favorite, just because of how they talk, Wisconsin. And if you like cheese sticks, might I suggest that you treat yourselves to some cheese curds if you happen to be in this area. If not, you can make do with Culver's cheese curds. They're not super authentic, but I mean, you know, hey, they're still pretty dang good. Am I right? Now, let's fail. We're just going to go ahead and fail. The Articles of Confederation, I already told you, they're doomed. They're not going to succeed. So some issues that they faced. Obviously, there's still a little bit of fighting with the Indians going on, who are in that Northwest Ordinance area. Remember, the natives signed a deal with the British, not with the colonists after the French and Indian War. So the natives are just like, well, what the crap? So we're still fighting with them over land, and this will continue. And it will continue to go badly for the Native Americans. Also, we had some trouble kicking the British off of their forts. I mean, no joke, like they wouldn't leave. And we went to them and knocked on their door. Hey, would you mind getting out now? We won. Don't know if anybody told you. And they say, well, why don't you make us? And we say, okay. And then they respond with, yeah, you and what army? Oh, got us there. We don't have one. So the British were really kind of hanging along. So that kind of stunk. Turn the page. Also, Britain and Canada completely stopped trading with us. They were being sore losers. Spain decided to shut off control of the Mississippi River to us. And they wouldn't let us use it unless we said it belonged to them. I mean, how childish does that sound, right, guys? That's just, it's ridiculous. And, you know, interstate trade was really tough. There were a lot of bullies, different currencies. And then it's the straw that breaks the camel's back. The you know what is going to hit the fan. And that, my dears, is Shae's Rebellion. Okay. So Shae's Rebellion is going to take place August of 1786 to January of 1787. So, I mean, it goes on for a little bit, just FYI. It takes place in Massachusetts, and it takes place because of taxes. Okay. Remember, can the Articles of Confederation tax? Go ahead, shake your head yes, shake your head no, or vocalize your thoughts. It's like I'm there with you. They couldn't. So each state was responsible for paying off their own war debt accrued from the American Revolution. And Massachusetts refused to issue paper money. I'm sorry, that was paper money. And instead, they wanted to pay their war debt off with, you know, more valuable money like gold and silver. And so they said, what do we have a lot of that we can tax so that we make more money? Oh, I know, land. So that's what they did. They put a huge tax on land. And what profession uses land the most? Farmers. So farmers were hit really hard. And if they couldn't pay, then their farms went into foreclosure. That really stunk. A lot of them went to debtors' prisons. Some of them had to sell themselves into servitude, like indentured servitude. And so they demanded change. After 2 months of protesting and asking the Massachusetts legislature to print paper money so they could actually pay this tax, and Massachusetts refused because they knew it was worthless, they legit revolted. Okay. You guys know that scene from Beauty and the Beast where Gaston's riling everybody up in the pub to go and kill the beast? And he's singing, you know, like, he's a beast, he's got fangs, major sharp ones. And everybody joins in. They say, kill the beast, kill the beast, kill the beast. Yeah. And it looks like this picture here. They go to the beast castle with, you know, fire and pitchforks. That's no joke what Shae's Rebellion was. Daniel Shays, a Revolutionary War veteran, encouraged farmers to revolt. And so they marched in a mob to a courthouse, and they shut it down because if the courthouse is closed, the courthouse cannot issue any statements of foreclosure. And so they were successful. And since the Articles doesn't have an army, they couldn't put this down. And this lasted for months, y'all, like 5 months. Finally, a Massachusetts militia from the state government, the governor sent them there, and they fired a couple shots. The rebels scattered. Most of them were caught and sentenced to death. Like, they weren't messing around. But, you know, eventually sentences got lighter and lighter, and eventually everybody was just like, oh, They realized, this probably isn't the best thing to do. The judges did say as though the rebels were driven by restless, destructive feelings to overturn the government. And Sam Adams, remember Sam Adams? Son of Liberty, Sam Adams, led the Boston Tea Party, Sam Adams. He called these farmers wicked and unprincipled men. I don't know if you agree with that or not. But the impact was that Europe saw us as a laughing stock. They made so much fun of us. We just, had a whole David Goliath situation where we beat Goliath as David, and now we can't suppress a rebellion of angry farmers with pitchforks. Not the best. And so people began to realize maybe the articles are too weak. Massachusetts asked for help to quell the rebellion. Congress couldn't assist them. And so perhaps it's time for a strong national government that can protect in times of crisis. But not everybody agreed. Not everybody thought this was a super big deal. Thomas Jefferson, who is actually not around, he's in France, by the way. He said a little rebellion now and then is a good thing. It is the natural manure for the tree of liberty, which he said must be refreshed from time to time with the blood of patriots and tyrants. So now and then it's okay. He went on to say, God forbid that we should ever be 10 years without such a rebellion. So, that's a little bit of a different thought. It's up to you whether or not you agree. Here's another little TJ quote for you. So it's time to determine if we need a new constitution. Okay. Here's the reasons for this. Number one, the national government is weak. They don't have power to collect taxes. They can't, there's no executive branch. There's no national court system. The states are not working well together. Everybody's printing their own money. They're fighting over issues with trade. Nationalists are really kind of concerned that the nation is going to fail. They kind of going off of what John Winthrop said, wanting us to be a city on the hill, back at Massachusetts Bay. They wanted the US to be a model for the world, like a Republican government. Look at what we can do. Look at what we've achieved. And they see us failing, and they're frightened of that. And then, of course, Shae's rebellion, which showed the complete disorder that can occur under a weak government. That's a pretty strong case for a new constitution. But listen, we're going to pick up there tomorrow. So hopefully you got through number 3 in your notes. I do have a little reading for you on Shae's rebellion. And other than that, that's good enough for today. I hope you guys are doing well. I'm so sorry that I'm not there, but I'll be back soon. Soon as Tuesday, by the way. I'll be back on Tuesday. Anyway, I adore you all, and I'll see you later.